Yes, good evening. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this AJA Zoom event. Welcome to our regulars. And if you're new to these sessions, we welcome you as well. Also to those watching on Facebook and to anybody listening to the audio replay, which is broadcast every Thursday at midday and Sundays at 4 p.m. on J-Air Community Radio. That's at FM 88 in Melbourne or at j-air.com.au everywhere else. My name is Alan Friedman. I'm Vice President of the Australian Jewish Association. On your screens, you will also see David Adler, who's the President of the AJA, and as well as our special guest for tonight, Professor Abraham Sion, or as we just found out, because he's in Israel, he's Abraham Sion. The topic, of course, is to whom was the promised land promised? The format will be a presentation from Abraham, and then we'll take some questions. If you do want to ask a question, as usual, raise your hand electronically. You do that by clicking on the reactions icon at the bottom of the screen, and that will tell you what to do. You'll see a little hand raised. You can place written questions on the chat function, and Robert Gregory, our Director of Public Affairs, will read some of them out during question time. And of course, if you do find the chat annoying, you are able to disable it. So last week we had a most interesting event with Professor Alan Johnson in the UK on why Israel is not a settler society. And we're going to continue this theme tonight by looking at the historical events following World War I and from a legal perspective. The issue, of course, is all about the legitimacy of Israel, because as we know, and what most of the world ignores, is that there is nothing illegal about Zionism and the establishment of a Jewish homeland in its ancestral territory. To take us through the important events at the conclusion of World War I and beyond, we're delighted to have Professor Abraham Sion join us. He is Professor Emeritus at Ariel University, where for over a decade he chaired the Centre for Law and Mass Media. Professor Sion earned his expertise in the Arab-Israeli conflict through intensive research, international and local conferences, lectures, articles, think tanks and debates in TV and radio shows for over 30 years. Simultaneously, he practiced law in civil and administrative matters, and he also served as Deputy State Attorney for Israel. And I will mention, and I'll mention it later, his book is that, and it's a fabulous book. It's just been released, and this is really going to be what we're talking about tonight. Professor Abraham Sion, thank you for joining us, and welcome to our Australian audience.
My pleasure.
Okay. So to set the scene, we're just going to have a brief look at the historical events that propelled Jewish interest in Zionism and a return to the biblical land of Israel. So, Professor, I'll hand over to you and you can give us some of this background.
Thank you. Well, to be able to understand the significance of our legal situation in this area of the world, one has to investigate the historical background which led to its formation. But before doing so, I would like to state unequivocally that the Arabs in general, and the Arabs of Palestine in particular, have no national rights in Mandatory Palestine west of the River Jordan. They were granted equal civil and religious rights, but no political or national rights. You will find this dramatic conclusion in a book based on a 5-year research which I published recently, entitled To Whom Was the Promised Land Promised, the book that you showed just now. What triggered me to do this research was the axiomatic worldwide contention that Judea and Samaria, widely known as the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, were Palestinian Arab territory under international law, and therefore the argument goes, all settlements in the West Bank are illegal and contrary to international law. My research proves that there is no legal justification to this argument. And what is even more perplexing is the fact that no international institution makes any effort to justify this claim. The ICJ, the International Court of Justice, the Security Council, the General Assembly, or the Red Cross, or other international organizations never made any attempt to show how the West Bank, which was not under the sovereignty of any Arab country, certainly was never a part of Palestinian Arab state, turned all of a sudden to Palestinian Arab territory. In none of the decisions of international institutions there is any mention of the Banff Declaration, the San Remo Resolution, or the British Mandate. Since these institutions cannot cope with these international documents, they simply ignore them as if they never existed. The British Mandate for Palestine is a very important document, but it was not created in a vacuum. It was preceded by other important decisions and treaties which paved the way to the formation and affirmation of the British Mandate, namely the Banff Declaration, the San Remo Resolution, and the Treaty of Sèvres. The Banff Declaration, which was announced on November 2nd, 1917, was the first international document which recognized the Jews as a nation and not just a religion, and promised them a homeland in Palestine. It stated as follows: His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. It being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of the existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. This short document has a great significance, and I'll point out a few, and I'll make a few points. The British government promised to facilitate the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, and the Jewish people alone, not for any other nation, but the Jewish people. At the time the Banff Declaration was announced, the Jews living in Palestine were a significant minority, around 10% of the total population. And the declaration envisaged that the Jews will have become eventually a majority and take over the country. In other words, at that time, it was very obvious that the Jews are going to become a majority and take over the country. The Arab majority in Palestine was not ignored. They were granted civil and religious equal rights in Palestine to safeguard them when they eventually become a minority, according to the plan based on the Banff Declaration. However, they were not granted any national or political rights whatsoever west of the River Jordan. Now, the British promise was granted to the Jews all over the world. I wanted to take note of this. Speaking about the existing non-Jewish community in Palestine and the Jewish people as a whole. In other words, the civil and religious rights are granted to the existing population in Palestine who are not Jews, but the national rights are given to the Jews everywhere in the world. In other words, every Jew in any place in the world could see Palestine at that time as his homeland. At the time the declaration was given, the area of Palestine, west of the River Jordan, was divided into three parts. It was not called Palestine. It was called the Sanjak of Jerusalem. Sanjak is a district. The northern part of Palestine at the time, of the area of Palestine, was granted to the French as a mandate. The southern part was granted to the British as a British mandate. But the core, the middle of what's called the subject of Jerusalem, that area was considered international at the time. It was under Ottoman sovereignty. As I said, in 1917, there was no Palestine. Palestine was carved out by the British for one reason only: to distinguish the area from southern Syria for the purpose of establishing within it a homeland for the Jewish people and the Jewish people alone. Until 1919, the whole Middle East was under Turkish sovereignty. The Middle East had no states, neither did it have international borders. it was part of the Ottoman Empire, divided administratively and ruled by governors called the Wali. The Banff Declaration had international repercussions. It was not a mere internal commitment between the British government and the Zionist Federation. It was announced worldwide soon after its delivery. It was endorsed by all the principal Allied powers, namely France, Italy, Japan, and the US, by the President and both houses of Congress. When I say by Britain, I mean Britain and its Commonwealth and other subsidies. The term national home, rather than a state, was used for the sake of convenience. It's asked sometimes why we say national home and not state. The idea is that it was made for convenience. The term was borrowed from the Zionist Congress in Basel, where it was first used. Secondly, the British regarded the whole affair as an Olympic experiment. It did not only depend on the fulfillment of the British promise, it depended no less on the Jewish people as well, whether they would be able to shift millions of Jews to Palestine from the comfort of civilized Europe to a barren, God-forsaken land in Palestine, stricken with poverty and malaria. It was accepted that if the Jews carry out their expectations and become a majority, this would lead to the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine. The second milestone in creating Jewish rights to Palestine was the San Remo Resolution. On April 24th, 25th of 1920, that's just over 100 years ago, after the war was over, the principal Allied powers convened in San Remo to decide on the future of the Middle East. They decided to divide the Middle East between the two contenders of the area who helped the Allied powers in the war, the Arab nation on the one hand and the Jewish people on the other. The principal Allied powers decided to grant the Arabs as a whole independence in Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and Hijaz, while leaving Palestine in trust to a state which would take up upon itself to establish a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. The San Remo Resolution is a bit different from the Banff Declaration. It's one step ahead. It does not say we will look in favor of establishing a Jewish home in Palestine, but it speaks very definitely in words that are very definite and very well known. The High Contracting Party agreed that Syria and Mesopotamia shall be provisionally recognized as independent states. This is on the one hand. On the other hand, one should regard the San Remo Resolution as a package deal. One cannot speak about dissolving Israel and leaving the Arab states as they are. The High Contracting Parties agreed to entrust the administration of Palestine to a mandatory to be selected by the principal Allied powers, and the mandatory will adopt what is written in the Banff Declaration and in favor of establishment of Palestine in Palestine for a national home for the Jewish people. In comparing these two documents, one should note the following. The San Remo Resolution demands a definite commitment on the part of the mandatory. It does not use terms such as view with favor, to use its best endeavors, coupled with a promise to facilitate the achievement of this object, but in definite terms, demanding that the mandatory will be responsible for putting into effect the Banff Declaration verbatim. In contrast to the Banff Declaration, which was first announced by the British government and received recognition separately from the principal Allied powers, in the San Remo Resolution, the decision was taken a priori by the contracting parties, which included the principal Allied powers and other countries as well. In the San Remo Resolution, the Middle East was divided between the Arab nation as a whole, including the Arabs of Palestine, were represented by Emir Hussein. Now, the Arabs of Palestine were represented by Emir Hussein from the Hijaz. Emir Hussein from the Hijaz spoke for all the Arabs in the Middle East, and that included the Arabs of Palestine. And he accepted this division. The Jewish people accepted it, and he accepted in the name of all Arabs in the Paris peace blocks. Now, it has often been asked who gave the principal Allied powers the power to divide the land which did not belong to them. The answer to this is that the Ottoman Empire renounced its sovereignty in favor of the principal Allied powers in the Treaty of Sèvres and implied in the Treaty of Lausanne. Now, all this is really the international law. When we speak about treaties, this is international law. So the Allied powers had the power to decide on the area because the sovereignty passed to them, and the sovereignty is like being a landlord. You know, and before the First World War, it was customary and accepted international law that any state that conquers another state can annex that state, can annex the area. But according to the 12 points principle, 14 points principle of the President of the United States, they decided to apply the mandate system. The mandate system means that they bring the people who live there, the indigenous people, to a certain advantage that they can build their own independence. But this was done for all other countries, not for Palestine. Palestine was given in trust for the British to hold them, and trust for the Jewish people. The creation of Syria and Lebanon and Iraq on the one hand, and Palestine on the other, was a package deal made simultaneously in the same resolution on the same day, where it cannot change the legal status regarding Palestine without affecting the rest of the Middle East. I now come to the third stage, where the rights of the Jewish people in Palestine have been deeply rooted. These rights were embodied in the Banff Declaration, in the Mandate for Palestine. The Mandate for Palestine was an international treaty confirmed by the Council of the League of Nations, and then further confirmed by all 51 members of the League. It is part of international law. In the mandate, Britain was appointed by the principal Allied powers to serve as mandatory for the sole purpose of establishing in Palestine a national home for the Jewish people. In other words, Palestine was taken away from Syria for one reason only: to establish a Jewish entity in Palestine and to give a national home. Britain made a solemn commitment and took upon itself the responsibility to give effect to the same. No similar commitment was granted to the Arabs of Palestine. The Mandate for Palestine was not aimed to solve any Arab problem. It came into being to solve the Jewish problem. If one looks at the mandate carefully, we find all the ingredients of building a Jewish state. In the preamble of the mandate, a very important paragraph was embodied. It states as follows: whereas recognition has thereby been given to the historical connection of the Jewish people with Palestine, and to the grounds for reconstituting their national home in that country. So the Jews came back to their ancestral country. It's not like the British who came to Australia or New Zealand, or the Americans, or those who came to America and occupied that area. Jews came back to their own country. They're not colonialists. They came back to their own. There's a historical connection between historical connections was recognized by the whole world. Mind you that the British Mandate was confirmed by the League of Nations and by 51 states of that time. In other words, it was confirmed by the whole world that the Jews were coming back to their own country to reconstitute their national home there. So the Jews, unique among the all nations, did not occupy a new territory similar to those occupied in the Americas, Australia, and New Zealand. They were recognized by the international community as a people who returned to their ancient homeland. Now, what the British Mandate says is that the Jews will be granted immigration, free settlement on land, getting civil rights, and receiving also British passports, Palestine passports, citizenship. Now, the British really had to comply with these rules verbatim. The British betrayed the Jews, first of all, in Jordan. You know, Jordan was part of Palestine. In Article 25, it says that of the British Mandate, it states that the area from the Jordan River to the border of Palestine, the eastern border of Palestine, would stop being part of Palestine and would be given to the Arabs as a gesture to Prince Abdullah from Hijaz, in order to prevent him from fighting the French at the time. So Churchill came to Jerusalem. He made a treaty, a commitment to Prince Abdullah to give him Transjordan and to cut it out from Palestine. This was really something that is against international law, but they received since they received the confirmation from the League of Nations, it was given it became sort of legal. But Palestine west of the River Jordan, it includes the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, and Gaza. The Arabs have no national rights there. And what do the Arabs have in their favor? The Arabs say two things. First of all, they say we were given by McMahon a promise for Palestine. This was rejected by the British. They said they never did that before, and they never gave Palestine. On the contrary, they left Palestine to become a Jewish national home, and did not never surrendered it to the Arabs. So this falls down actually. The other contention is that they have the right of self-determination. But self-determination, there were no Palestinians in 1917, or 1916, or 1920. At the time, there were no Palestinians. The Palestinian Arabs were part of the Arab community, which was represented by Prince Hussein of Hijaz. So they cannot come now after 80 years and say, after 70 years, and say we want part of Palestine, because at the time they were part of the Arab entity, and and the Middle East was divided between the Jews and the Arabs. This was the end of it. So they have no rights really in Western Jordan. When you compare the two things together, you find that the Jews have every right to Judea, Samaria, and Gaza Strip, but the Arabs have no rights, no national rights whatsoever. They have civil and religious rights only. So We're happy to answer questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Abraham. Just before we get into the questions, I'll briefly mention to people that if you're listening on J-Air, this is the Australian Jewish Association Zoom event, which we have every Wednesday night. Our guest tonight is Professor Abraham Sion, and he's just written a book called To Whom Was the Promised Land Promised? And he's just been outlining some of the historical events that happened immediately after World War I. We're going to have a little bit of a discussion with him now. Just before we do, I'll hand over to David, who will tell us what's happening next week, and then we'll get into the Q&A.
Okay, thank you very much, Alan. Firstly, if there's anyone on this Zoom event that's not yet supporting AJA, please do so. We can't do this work without tangible support. You can go to the website jewishassociation.org.au to apply for membership, make a donation, join the email list, and also like and follow our Facebook page for daily updates on news and views. Next week, we switch locations, so to speak, and we look at the role of Germany in the EU, whether it is really acting as if it is part of the West or as an appeaser of Iran. And our guest is Ben Weinthal, who is a research fellow with the Foundation for Defence Democracies and also a Jerusalem Post journalist. And he is arguing that Germany's support for the Islamic Republic of Iran is jeopardising security of the European Union, the Middle East, and even the US. So we will hear his presentation and argument next week.
Thanks, David. So we'll take some questions in just a moment. I've got a couple of my own, and I want to start by asking you, Abraham. We talk a lot about, and everybody, I think our audience will understand that Britain was involved in setting up the mandate, but where were the French in all of this? Because we know that it was the Sykes-Picot agreement that determined the borders of the lands. And then what happened to the French? Why are we always talking about the British in what they're doing and not the French?
Well, this is because the mandates were divided between the British and the French in the Middle East. The French got Syria and Lebanon, and the British got Mesopotamia or Iraq later and Palestine. So the British were involved in Palestine much more than the French, and they took upon themselves they were responsible for putting into effect the Banff Declaration. So that's why we speak about the British. The French had all the authority, the mandate in Syria and Lebanon, but none in Palestine.
Okay, so did they actually set up mandates in those Arab countries?
Yes, at the time. They set up mandates, but the mandates were very short because the mandates were intended to bring the indigenous people to independence, to teach them how to look after themselves and to be independent. Not for Palestine, because the Jews in Palestine then were a minority, and they were supposed to be a majority to give them independence. So that's why they stalled the situation until the Jews would be majority. But then the British, of course, had a change of heart and changed the whole system in Palestine.
And this concept of mandates, was that done before all of this? Is the implementation of mandates something that's happened before, or was it a fairly new concept after World War I?
It was a new concept. It was never done before. As I said before, the First World War, countries who conquered areas from other countries usually annexed them and didn't put in the mandate. But then President Woodrow Wilson of the United States decided on the 14 points and said, Why don't we give those people their independence? Why don't we make the our conquer for their benefit? And that's why they decided to change the situation and not annex the areas, but give the mandates. This is actually international law, and the whole now tries to avoid it as if it never happened.
And you mentioned that it was somewhat of an experiment. Did the British feel that the Jews would be successful in reaching that point where they could successfully run a state?
No, there are two things here. If the British thought that the Jews would immigrate to Palestine, I'm not sure about that. But that's why it was an experiment, because it was very difficult then, in 1920, 1930, to bring Jews into Palestine. They were living in Europe. It was before the Nazi regimes there. So the Jews were content in Europe. Why should they come to a barren land, God-forsaken land with malaria and illnesses? But then the Jews, the British thought that the Jews do come in masses and do become majority, then they are in a situation intelligently and professionally, they could turn the country into a state, the Jewish state.
Mm. And of course, the Arabs say that at the time the land was taken, that their land was taken, chopped up and handed from Christians to Jews with no regard for them. So are the Arabs or the Muslims entitled to feel somewhat sidelined in this arrangement?
Well, let's make some division between the two things. Legally, they have no right whatsoever in Palestine. Now, emotionally, if you want, morally, they feel that Palestine was taken from them. But I would say that Palestine was their country, like the White House was their house. Exactly. I mean, they had no rights in Palestine, but when they show the map, they show as if they had Palestine, and now they had nothing. They had nothing before, and now they were given in the Oslo Accords. If the Oslo Accords would have succeeded, they would have taken all the West Bank, I think.
Yes.
But then when they show the maps, we don't show any maps contrary to that. We should have shown that the Arabs had nothing, and look what they have now. And they spoiled it again.
Okay, let's go to the audience questions. So I've got Ron, Hugh, Reuven and Leon. So Ron, you're first up. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, good evening. Thank you very much for your summary, Professor Sion. As you know, a lot of the legal arguments have been hijacked by politicization. That includes from the Secretary General of the United Nations to the European Union countries to even the international jurists like Falk and John Dugard. How do you deal with this politicization of legal argument?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? How do I feel about?
How do you deal with the politicization, the political hijacking of legal arguments?
Well, we should make a distinction between the two. There is the legal argument and there is the political argument. The political argument has nothing to do with the legal argument. In other words, the legal argument says that the Jews have all the rights in Judea and Samaria and in Gaza. Now, there are some political people who say, well, if we keep Judea and Samaria, we're not going to be a Jewish state. And I say, this has nothing to do with each other. If you feel that you want to give these areas, then I'm not going to argue with you. But I would say that you're giving your own home. It's not you're returning areas, but you're giving your own home for nothing. That's what I would tell those people. In other words, the political situation has nothing to do with the legal situation.
Okay, Hugh, your turn. Please unmute yourself.
Hello, Professor Sion. I'm joining you from England. I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I've actually made a film called Whose Land, which many of the AJA supporters would have either known about or seen. I do have a question. I've got a copy of the mandate document here, and I have a question. In your talk, you outlined the British obligations in Articles 4, 6, and 7. My question relates to Article 5, which says, the mandatory shall be responsible for seeing that no Palestine's territory shall be ceded or leased to or in any way placed under the control of the government of any foreign power. Now, my question is this: was the British intention to partition the territory west of the Jordan River into Arab and Jewish states, both in the 1937 Peel Commission and it was the UN, the partition plan in 47, and Britain's subsequent recognition of Jordan's illegal annexation of Judea and Samaria? Was this British action really a violation of Article 5 of the mandate?
Well, the British mandate came into effect only after the Jordan was given to the Arabs. If it were given before, I would say that it's a total violation of the mandate. But when the division was made, when Jordan was carved away from Palestine, the British mandate for Palestine did not go into effect, was not yet confirmed by the League of Nations. So therefore, one could say that they could do that legally.
I'm talking about the 1937 Peel Commission, actually, creating an Arab state west of the Jordan River. Was this not a violation of Article 5?
I'm not sure about that, because the Peel Commission really did not. It was a commission, and it was not. It couldn't decide on anything. It gave a recommendation. It said this is the best thing to do, because we should separate the Arabs from the Jews, because they cannot live together. That's what they came to a conclusion, and therefore they decided to recommend that Palestine would be divided. But if the Arabs would have accepted it, and after the United Nations have offered it, if the Arabs would have accepted it and the Jews have accepted it, it's a different matter. But since the Arabs did not accept it, so it did not go into effect at all. It had no legal meaning.
Does that answer your question, Hugh? You need to unmute yourself. No, so, no. Are you
satisfied with the answer?
Does that answer your question? You'll need to unmute yourself, Hugh, before we.
I can now. Not quite. Perhaps I'll phrase it in another way. Is the whole concept of a two-state solution west of the Jordan River, which of course started in 1937 and has been mooted several times and offered several times, is that not a breach of Article 5 of the mandate, the whole concept of a two-state solution?
Well, it's a different, you're taking a two-state solution now, we're talking 1937. If it's 1937, I said it's a recommendation. And therefore, it has no legal effect. It's a recommendation, either they accept it or not. But if you speak about two-state solution now, that's also a different matter. because Israel was in control of the whole area, and Israel was agreed to decide on parts of those areas, whether they would be Arab. It was not decided in the Oslo Accords whether they would be given a state or they would give it autonomy. It says it was quite obscure what was going to happen after 5 years. But I don't think that this would, if the Jews, if Israel and the Palestinians would have accepted it, and the world would have endorsed it, then maybe it would have been legal. It would have obliged Israel to agree to it. But in this situation that is now, the Arabs rejected it and are fighting against the Jews in the Palestinian territories, in the Judea and Samaria rather. It has no legal significance at all.
Professor, you've actually touched on an interesting point, because you keep telling us the legality of the situation, and our audience would agree with you 100%. But you mentioned that if the world would have accepted it. So do you think that because the world has not been so ready to accept the situation, the concept of Israel in its ancestral homeland, is that part of the problem? Well, we're all talking about the legalities, and you've made it very clear that what happened in terms of leading up to Israel's creation was all perfectly legal. Yet the world at the moment seems to almost be going down another road and questioning whether Israel is indeed a legitimate state, and of course they then want to take that further and say, well, perhaps the Palestinians, quote, Palestinians are more entitled to the land. So is the problem really one of, well, two problems? Firstly, our side hasn't done a good enough job of explaining the facts, and secondly, is the world not really interested in hearing the facts?
Well, I said that before. You know, the resolution, the San Remo resolution, is a package deal. You cannot say that Israel has no legal rights, but the Arabs, Iraq and Syria and Lebanon have legal rights. If you dissolve the Jewish entity, you've got to dissolve all the Arab countries as well. So this goes as a package deal. You cannot dissolve one without the other. This is one thing. The other thing is that the world cannot say Israel has no legal rights now. Israel is an illegal state. In fact, I didn't hear this anywhere, that the world would say that Israel has no legal rights. All we hear is that Israel has no legal rights in Judea and Samaria and the Gaza Strip. That's what we usually hear. So when we speak about Judea and Samaria, I would say we have to go back to the essence of the agreements, of the essence of the treaties, the essence of international law. And that was all fixed in 1920, 1922, 1917. The Banff Declaration, San Remo Resolution, and also the treaties of Lausanne and Sèvres. They were all based there, and nothing changed till today. Nothing changed at all. The Oslo Accords did not change anything, because Oslo Accords were actually frustrated by the Arabs. So the world cannot say that we don't agree, that you are illegal. This is all rubbish. Israel exists. And also, when I hear a two-state solution, it strikes me as something wrong. There's no two-state solution. Israel exists 74 years. If anybody wants to establish an Arab state in Palestine, then he should say so. He should say so. Why say two-state solution? It's one-state solution, the Arabs, because Israel exists. Israel does not need a solution. Israel exists.
Yes, and it sounds as if what you're saying is that the politics of the situation has overtaken the historical facts of the situation. And if that's the case, we're obviously not doing a very good job of winning arguments. So How can we do that better?
Well, I've been speaking about the lack of hasbara, or lack of public diplomacy for the last 50 years, since the 6-Day War. I've been saying that Israel is failing in hasbara, and particularly after 1993, after the Oslo Accords. Israel failed in explaining the situation, and the Arabs have always had the upper hand. Why, I don't know. I think Israel is not the Israeli government, and also the Jewish leadership in the world is not feeling that this is important, that Hezbollah is important. But I say it's very much, it's very important. It's a very important issue to explain to the world and to show. For example, if you take the Nakba, what's the Nakba? Nakba say that when the Jewish area, when the Jewish state was established in 1948, in the 15th of May, it's their bad situation. It's their fall down. But I say it's not the fall down is not because of the Jewish state. The fall down is because they wanted to annihilate the Jewish state and they didn't succeed. It's like, you know, for example, somebody wants to kill another person and he only injured him, and he goes to jail, and his whole family go around the world and say, look, he's castrated, he's in a poor situation, his family has no money, no living possibilities, and all this. But they forget why he was in prison. The whole world forgets why Israel was why the Nakba happened. It's not because of Israel was established, it's because they tried to annihilate Israel, to throw the Jews into the sea, and they did not succeed. That's why they have fled the country. That's why they are refugees. That's why the situation is still today.
Yes. We'll take Reuven's and Leon's questions. So Reuven, you're first. Please unmute yourself.
Okay, I'll try to make it quick. Before I just ask the question, I mean, just a background. The San Remo conference was preceded by another conference, the Beersheba conference, which took place between Abraham Sion and the Ribbono Shel Olam, and he's the one who made the promise. Who's the promise to? It was ratified in the Torah. I'll come to the question. Sorry?
Could you please slow down, because I don't...
Oh yeah, okay, I'll slow down. I said prior to the San Remo conference, there was a Beersheba conference, the conference between Hashem, the Ribbono Shel Olam, and Avraham Avinu, and that's where the promise of who the land will go to, his Avram's descendants. It was ratified by Yaakov, by Israel. Before he passed away, he made the statement to his sons, don't leave me here in Egypt, take me to, bury me in Marat HaBikparah. That's where I buried Sarah, where Abraham, I'm coming to it, where Abraham buried Sarah, where Yitzchak and Leah and Rivka buried, and where I buried Leah. So that begs the question: why was it necessary to tell his Yaakov, tell his sons where they have it? It's already known. That's a legal argument in case the Bnei Ishmael, the Ishmaelites, should come and contest the right of you to bury me there.
Okay, so Reuven, are you saying why doesn't the world accept the biblical narrative more readily? Is that what you're getting at?
No, what I'm saying very simply, we're talking about international law, we're talking about legalities. This is the legal precedent. It's very clear. And the argument that the Arab nations having is that we don't accept the Torah. According to the Quran, you have no right, etc. It's a contempt of the Torah, basically. So,
okay.
What's your opinion about what I'm saying?
Professor, do you have any comments about the role of the biblical narrative in all of this?
Let me say, if I would have said in my book that Israel has right to exist and Israel has right to be in Judea and Samaria because it's called Judea and Samaria, and because the biblical times, the Jews were there, they would have said totally this has no legal effect today. So I went to the legal situation when they speak about the settlements in the West Bank and in Judea and Samaria, and they say they are illegal. I want to show how legal they are. When you want to show how legal they are, you have to depend on you have to speak about the international law. You cannot speak about the biblical situation. But in the British mandate, there is a lot of biblical words. In other words, by saying that Israel, the Jews have a right, historical right to the area of Palestine, and they have a right to reconstitute their national home there. You have nothing better than that. I can tell you one thing more. During the debates in the San Remo Convention, there were strong debates between the French and the British and the Italians and so on, particularly between the British and the French. Lloyd George was the British Prime Minister, said, I want Palestine to be according to the biblical situation, according to the 12 tribes that were there. We have nothing better to show that it's biblical, that it's based on biblical situation than to show that the borders of Palestine, Lloyd George was the Prime Minister and Balfour was the Foreign Minister, wanted them to be according to the biblical situation, biblical borders at the time. So this is the best way to show that there is a biblical theme in the whole concept. But you cannot say that because of Abraham Avinu and Sarah and Yitzhak and Yaakov were in Beersheba, that's why we should have, according to international law, we have a right. This will have hold water.
Okay, Leon, please unmute yourself. And then we've got Robert with some written questions.
Oh, yes, Professor. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I can hear loud and clear, yeah.
Professor, it seems to me that when we reduce the whole of the situation to its essentials, it appears that in the real world and not in the academic or legal world, especially the nebulous international law world, what really counts is realpolitik and naked power. And so that's why the world sweeps under the carpet the indisputable rights of the Jewish nation to the whole of the land of Israel. Or do you think that it is only where Jews are involved that realpolitik trumps law?
Well, I would say that when they say that we are holding territories illegally, and therefore we should be punished, and therefore we should be that we are committing crimes against humanity, and all of this nonsense, we should show that according to the law, according to legal situation, they are wrong. First of all. But then comes the realpolitik. The realpolitik is really based on what? On interests, and mainly also on hasbara, on the public diplomacy. We are doing very badly in public diplomacy, I can tell you that. All the Jewish community in the world, also in Israel, we are doing very bad in this. And we are not achieving anything because I think the Israeli government so far did not feel that this is an important issue. But I think that it's a very important issue, and I've been recommending that Israel will do much more in this situation. Yeah. And I agree, it's not only that. The world loves to hate the Jews. And when they love to hate the Jews, every single thing counts. You know, everything that we do, we're always to blame. But Israel, in other words, should have done much more in this issue, in this position, but it's not doing it. According to the legal, my book is actually intended to the legal audience, actually. And my book speaks about the legality of our holding of the Judea and Samaria and the Gaza Strip. This was the main issue of the book. And therefore, in legal terms, the world has no justification to what they say. This is very important. When you say you're holding an area illegally, and I show you that you're not holding an area illegally, and this is wrong, it means that the whole concept falls. Because why should the Jewish people be punished on something that they have every right to do? And the Arabs have no right whatsoever.
You won't get any argument from this audience. Robert is our Director of Public Affairs. Have you got some written questions, Robert?
Yeah, thanks, Professor. Just wanted to ask if you could elaborate a bit more on the Jordan is Palestine idea. Legally speaking, we've had a question, is Jordan a Palestinian state? Is that possible?
Well, when the Banff Declaration was made, and then the British mandate came into effect, the borders of Palestine were not yet decided upon, but they were to be east of the River Jordan. How east, we don't know, but what was promised to Weizmann at the time was that the railway to Hijaz, which is about 80 kilometers, or if you are like 50 miles from the Jordan River, this was promised to the Jewish people, not the borders of the whole Jordan. But what happened was that in 1921, Emir Abdallah, who was the son of Hussein, the Sharif of Mecca, in Hijaz, decided to fight the French to install back his brother, Faisal, to become king of Syria. The British were very disturbed about this. And they wanted to stop him from fighting the French because they were afraid that this is going to bring the British to a clash with the French. So Churchill, Winston Churchill, who was then the colonial secretary, came over to Jerusalem and he met with Abdallah and he told him, we want to give you Jordan, we want to carve out Jordan from Palestine and give it to you as a prince at the time. And then he became king, of course, but at the time he was promised as a ruler or as an administrator, and then a prince of Jordan, and in one condition, that you would not fight the French. And he promised not to fight the French, and that's what happened. So what happened was that Churchill informed the colonial office and also the Ministry of the Foreign Ministry and said, how can we do this legally? So they decided to change the law in Jordan, in the eastern part of Palestine, and not allow the Jews, not to allow the Jews to be there or to live there. And therefore, Jordan was carved out of Palestine, and no more became a part of Palestine.
Mm.
This was also confirmed by the League of Nations, and that's why we have a problem here.
So yes, and I guess to finish, I just want to ask you about about resolving the problem, the situation. Communal organisations, certainly in this country, are totally wedded to the two-state solution and won't have a bar of anyone that challenges it as the way to peace in the Middle East. There are a few other options than the two-state solution. So do you have any particular preferred formula for solving the problem that currently exists?
Well, the best solution, I think, would be to give the Arabs in Israel today, in the Palestinian Arabs, autonomy in their places, in their cities, and in their areas, in areas A, and to press that very hard. In other words, if need be, we should even use arms to make this go into effect. And this is the situation would be until I think that sometime Jordan will become Palestine. And therefore, the Palestinians have a right to vote in Jordan, in Palestine, the eastern part of Palestine, and not in the western part of Palestine. I want to say something which is maybe sound a bit too pessimistic. But I think that the Palestinians are working very hard on making all the Middle East, all Israel and Jordan, Palestine. You see, Jordan today has 80% Palestinians. And in one time or the other, maybe one generation, maybe two generations, they're going to be Palestine. The Gaza Strip is already Palestine. The West Bank, Judea and Samaria, are already decided by the world that they are occupied Palestinian territory. What's left is Israel within the Green Line. Now here they're working on having a one-state solution. You know, like they're working very hard to build an entity which would then make use of the situation in Jordan and other places. So we can see that the situation today is that we are from all sides quite in a situation where we have to take precautions. But I think that the best way to deal with this would be to give them rights, every right possible, but not national rights in Judea and Samaria, and keep that until Jordan becomes Palestine.
Okay. Look, we have come up to time. Professor Abraham Sion, thank you for joining us. And thank you also for taking the time to write your important book. I'll just hold it up again. People can see that. It's a very detailed analysis of the history that we've just been talking about. We're certainly fighting a war on disinformation, but books like yours do make our advocacy work all the more authoritative. I'm not sure what's going to convince everybody, but we do need to be on the front foot. So thank you very much for joining us, and we wish you all the best. Just before we go, I'll mention that the L'Chaim program with Morris Klein is on right now, 3ZZZ, FM 92.3. That's all we have for tonight. Join us next week with Benjamin Weinthal from the Jerusalem Post, and the topic is Germany, a stalwart of the West or an appeaser of Iran. Don't forget, you can keep up to date with what the AJA is doing and talking about, and on our Facebook page. Please like it and share it widely. But for now, we wish you all a very good evening and look forward to seeing you again next week as usual. Bye for now.
May I say thank you for the opportunity to present the book, and I hope that people would have to consult it. And I would be very pleased to hear comments on the book.
Okay, there you go. So it's available from the usual places like Amazon. I think that's where I got mine from. So I do recommend it. So thank you very much again, Professor Abraham Sion.